Welcome to the FNO InsureTech podcast, a place where movers and shakers from all points within the insurance ecosystem gather and discuss all things InsureTech. We talk about how technology and innovation are affecting and driving change in the industry. Here are your hosts, Matt D. Fothery, Lee Boyd, and Rob Beller.
Hey, podcast world. Welcome to another remarkable, unbelievable, scientific episode of, did you like that?
I like that.
Scientific. Because it is kind of a scientific episode that we're doing today, wouldn't you say?
It is. It is. It's a very scientific episode.
We have on a guest who has like a bunch of PhDs working for him.
Yeah, he's a really, really smart guy who does some pretty amazing things that I've heard the words, but I have a hard time understanding exactly what it means. But
We'll see if we can't get a little more illuminated today. We have Ryan Kottenstette from Cape Analytics. He is the co-founder and CEO of the company. And I mean, this guy is brilliant by himself.
Yeah.
But what he went and did was hired a bunch of people who were even brillianter.
Right.
You like my use of English language?
Yeah. It made us all sound real smart. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
But yeah. I think today, I know today we're going to get to talk with him about Cape Analytics. We're going to get to talk about his past and where Cape Analytics came from and what it is and what their mission is.
And
we're
how
going to
they're
get
really
to talk about all that fun stuff.
And how they're really shaking up a space inside of the insurance vertical. They work in a few verticals, but inside of the insurance vertical, that was kind of waiting to happen.
Yeah.
And with aerial imagery and deep learning, they are doing for risk maybe what no other technology company is doing currently. So rather than listening to us, see, at one end of the continuum, there's all these brilliant people doing all this stuff, and at the other end of that continuum
is us.
We do the podcast for those people.
That's right. We ask the questions. They have the answers.
There you go. And so without further ado, we'll get to Ryan's answers, and we'll talk to, we'll let you listen to our interview with Ryan Kottenstette, CEO and co-founder of Cape Analytics. Hey, everybody. We're here with our guest, the CEO and co-founder of Cape Analytics, Ryan Kottenstette. Where do we find you today?
I'm in Silicon Valley, down in Los Altos.
Welcome. Sheltered in place, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's right. We've been dutifully sheltering in place for, I guess, a couple of months now.
Right. Feels like it's been a while, doesn't it? It has been a while.
Yeah, quite a while.
Let's just jump right in and start by talking about Cape Analytics. Give us a minute or two on what Cape Analytics is and what you guys do.
Yeah, thank you. So in short, we provide instant access to critical property information that help financial stakeholders in property assess the risk. And so we started first and foremost with insurance companies, residential property insurance companies, and mostly kind of on the front end of their workflow, so risk analysis. So this means reinsurance, quoting, rating, underwriting. And recently we've expanded that to cover commercial property. And we've also moved to touch some adjacent financial stakeholders beyond insurance, but also focused on real estate. So what's really unique about us is the information we provide them is all proprietary to Cape. It's all highly relevant to assessing risk. And we create that information by sourcing input data from partners, primarily image providers, but also other information providers as well. And we've built our own deep learning algorithms to turn that raw information into targeted risk assessment information for our customers' workflows.
So you primarily are providing a service to the underwriting side?
Yeah, I would say rating, underwriting, reinsurance. We're starting to think about marketing workflows a bit. That's a bit newer for us, but that's right.
So does Cape Analytics give back a package? Give me a little more information. You're using imagery and then using deep learning to give ideas about risk or about possible structure damage, something like that. Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, let me give you a boiled down anecdote,
Great.
and we've grown
Please.
significantly from there. But let's just say, for example, that the condition of somebody's roof is a significant factor in their expected losses. We've proven that to be true structurally with our own information, and it's broadly regarded as the case. Roof condition is important for a whole bunch of wind risk factors as well as hail and other weather events. We source imagery from our partners, cover the entire continental United States, 3-4 times a year, and our deep learning algorithms suck in all that imagery and then look at the image and make an assessment about, in this example, the roof condition, and that becomes part of a living database, and we make that information available to our customers instantly via API.
Wow. So you're a co-founder of this company. What started this whole journey?
We started Cape about 5 years ago. Before Cape, I was an investor at one of the bigger venture capital firms in Silicon Valley called Coastal Ventures.
Mhm.
And while I was there, I had two big areas where I had spent a lot of time. The first was in computer vision and analytics. So, using deep learning to extract information from imagery to power different industry verticals. And turns out we made some very successful early stage investments and incubated some good companies kind of broadly applying that technology, one in agriculture and then one in packaging, shipping logistics. So, around, let's just say, for example, you order something from Amazon, that order gets fulfilled in a warehouse. And so we leveraged computer vision in both of those applications to great effect and built some really big businesses. That's sort of one SKU. The other SKU was a bunch of remote sensing companies, so drone companies, satellite companies that we looked at. And so the inspiration or the insight that led to Cape Analytics, after I had stepped out of KV, was this notion that deep learning has come a long way in our ability to extract structured information from imagery, and geospatial imagery is becoming more and more available from different modes, whether it be aircraft, satellites, or drones. And so Cape is really the intersection of those two trends, but with a deep focus on financial stakeholders and property.
I want to talk more about Cape, but I have to ask you a question here. You're at a great VC firm. You have a great job there. How do you leave that? Right? I mean, did you had an itch, you had a bug? Why make that jump? Why not just stay put? You're having success and probably doing well.
A friend of mine, when I joined that firm, who had been at that firm prior to me, I asked him as I was contemplating. So the backstory is I've sort of always, bounced back and forth between a operating company role and an investing role in early stage technology. Prior to Coastal Ventures, I had been on the early founding management team of a tech company we spun out of Stanford. So I asked this friend of mine while I was thinking about joining this firm, what he thought the trade-offs of the role were. And he said he really loves the breadth and intellectual diversity of the investing role, but he missed the ability to kind of directly have an impact hands-on and really go deep the same way you get to if you're building something yourself. So to me, this just scratches a different itch, which is, I get to be obsessive compulsive about this one thing and pour all of my mental energy into this opportunity. So that was sort of the big extrinsic motivator. I would say the intrinsic motivator was, I was just really excited about building, a team and a company and a culture from scratch that I could be proud of. And so I'm very proud of the team we've built and the culture we've built and the way we've built a philosophy of partnership with our customers. And that's been just intrinsically extremely rewarding as well.
Is this the first company you founded or been a co-founder with?
As I said, I was on like the founding management team of a company we spun out of Stanford before KV, and then I was privileged to incubate from scratch a few companies during my investing days. But this is the first time I've really, I would say I had a very good front row seat a few times, and so this is really the first time I've put a stake in the ground.
So we've seen Cape around for several years. Actually, in the world of InsureTech, I think that you were founded even before we were calling it InsureTech. Is that right?
It is. It's really funny. As sort of a half joke, one of our guys made a slide of the mentions of InsureTech, and I think we predate kind of that being a popular term by maybe 9 months or something.
Okay, so you just beat it. Do you consider yourself an InsureTech company?
I consider us a software and technology company that has a deep vertical focus on insurance. So yeah, I think that's a nice, concatenation.
I know that you've been invested. Some of your investors are, certainly insurance focused, right?
Yeah, no question. Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the big pieces of news that came out in, I don't know exactly when, but in not too distant past, is the investment by State Farm. What attracted them? I mean, obviously that's an enormous validation, I would think, for your product.
They're a very good partner of ours. I think from day one, we've adopted a philosophy and an approach to working with our customers as partners, and that's been true through and through. And as we've gotten bigger, we had to build a full national product and be able to support kind of enterprise grade at the highest levels before we kind of earned the right to have conversations with some of those top 5 carriers. But we've got that under our belt now. We've got over 40 customers, large enterprise customers, fully deployed. That number keeps increasing, significantly quarter over quarter, year over year. As we got to know the State Farm people, there's some very, very bright folks in that organization, and they have just a very authentic commitment to their mission, which is really about providing risk protection and security for a bunch of people. And so I think just we have just an alignment of work styles that we really like, and obviously they have a huge impact, and by virtue of us partnering with them, we have an opportunity to deliver huge impact as well.
So as a CEO at Cape, tell us for a minute about what do you do? What's your job?
I had a really good professor in business school who had founded a very successful software company. And he said, the answer to that question is clear. Your job is to do the most important thing. Unfortunately, that doesn't make it any more clear because,
Right.
because that changes all the time. So,
life is like a river.
Right. So I zoom out, and broadly speaking, the way I think about it is set the overall strategy and targets, then identify and get the right resources. And those resources mean capital as well as really good people. Set the strategy, get the resources, establish and lead the culture, and then, get out of the way and make sure everybody has what they need. And so, externally, we have, I talked a bit about this kind of partner culture with customers. I think internally, we seek to give a lot of context, hire really good people, hold people accountable, and then empower them, and really devolve responsibility and empower folks. And so, those to me are kind of the let's say fundamental levers. But what that means on the day to day can be very, very tactical firefighting, on IT issues, legal issues, customer issues, HR issues. It also means, not getting in there tactically when the right people you've hired to do things have things well in hand, right?
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. How many people work at Cape Analytics?
Yeah, we've got a bit over 50.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that number continues to grow. We've had the interesting experience of onboarding, I think 3 or 4 great new hires, in the COVID era. So after our company went full remote, these people joined and came on board, and so that's a special experience for them and for us.
Are there any data scientists on the team? I would imagine there are.
Oh yeah, there's a bunch. So I would say we've got probably 10 or 15 PhDs in the company.
Wow.
That are a combination of machine learning, computer vision, and data science. So from one of those SKUs, and a lot of math PhDs and astrophysics PhDs, or frankly, some of the folks that have done kind of the computational sciences side of biology seem to be a very, very effective kind of pathway to some of the data science stuff that we do.
That must be interesting working with brilliant people.
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, it's incredibly rewarding. And what's the most thrilling is, getting on a big high stakes kind of customer success discussion where we're, in with the executive level. And, we just this week, I was talking to a major carrier, and we had probably 10 folks from their side and 10 folks from our side. And I got to join for a bit. And they've been a customer for several years now. And I think once you've done the kind of, we're delivering the product, it's working, we speak your language, we understand your problem, then you can get really deep into the technical. Like if you can put the deeply technical stuff very clearly framed in the context of what the customer needs, that's kind of when magic happens.
We're in the insurance vertical. You're in the insurance vertical. We're mostly talking about the insurance vertical, but it must have been an interesting education for you to jump into it and to learn the nuances of insurance, which are, as you have learned and know, are quite different than other verticals. How's that been? Because in our vertical, and I assume in all, but I think particularly in insurance, earning trust is a huge part of the equation. I think that the insurance vertical is very relationship driven, and relationships, work well based on trust. So talk for a minute about what that journey's been like for you and the kinds of things you've learned and had to deal with.
It's extraordinarily unique. I think I was told that, but it's different to be told that or to hear that and think you get it than to experience it. And I would say it's very different. But, as I've started to understand and appreciate this, I really have come to, appreciate the reasons for that. So, you mentioned sort of being very relationship driven. And I think there's a version of that which conjures kind of an image of 3 martini lunches and the kind of
Correct.
Mad Men era.
Yes.
And that there's some historical veneer of that. But, when I think about relationship driven, I really think about the fact that this is, to me, insurance is a financial service that one of our team members said, "Hey, I get it." And this is a Stanford software engineer that doesn't come from insurance, and said, "I get it. Insurance is the immune system of society." And I thought that was really well put. So to me, the relationship nature of it is, this is a large industry that has a capacity to create a lot of good. And there's a bunch of people in it that are, mission driven and proud of what they do every day.
Yes.
And so coming to it with the context of that, I think tells you a lot. And the other thing that's really important, it's maddening, candidly, at times how slowly the deal cycle can move. But when you put on the hat of, there's a lot at stake, and a lot of harm, real harm, can occur if you get it wrong. That it makes sense, right? That it's highly rational, right? The web apps are developed much more quickly than aircraft, right? Because the downside risk of making a mistake is just very different, right?
Right.
And
Sure.
so there's an element of that here as well that it's important to just be sensitive to.
So let's talk about deep learning and what makes your product unique. We hear that phrase a lot: artificial intelligence, deep learning, machine learning. Can you give us a minute on what you mean by deep learning and help a lot of people in our audience who aren't from the technical side to understand not only how it's defined, but how it's applied?
Sure. It's funny. Let me answer that in 1 second. But earlier in the podcast, you asked about Cape Analytics predates the popular usage of the term InsureTech. We also predate the popular, what I call AI washing of tech companies. So the trendy thing used to be social, mobile, local, and then some time ago, AI for everything became the trend. And so we predate that a bit. And frankly, we really just put our heads down and said, this seems like a really important, groundbreaking piece of new technology that can have a big benefit. Let's go do that thing that makes obvious sense. And now everything's AI something. And a lot of those are really, I would say the AI is really the marketing aspect of it. It's not the engineering and data science aspect of it. You can still accomplish a lot of stuff with prescriptive linear rule sets that are different. So we kind of, to our core, I think, have some of the brightest minds and have stayed bleeding edge on this new field of technology and brought that at rapid pace into our products and customers. So So to answer your question, what is it? You talk about deep learning. I need to explain the concept of a neural network. So back in the 60s, there was a lot of activity around this idea of a neural network, which is a computing concept to basically, roughly approximate or replicate the notion of a brain neuron, which, in very simplistic terms, you give it an input and then it performs some basic calculation on that input or applies some weight, and then it creates an output. And it turns out that if you take that basic building block and you build an array of them and you connect them side by side, and then you connect them, in series one on top of the other, then you can put increasingly complicated things into the front of that network and get an increasingly interesting transform out the back, right? And so that's, in a rough approximation, the way our brains are structured.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was the concept. And in the 60s and 70s, it was a kind of a really not much talked about academic pursuit. And what we've since learned is that the reason it never really went as far as we had hypothesized is we had several orders of magnitude too little computing power to actually get the benefit that was required. And so with the move to cloud compute, with the move to massive parallel compute architecture, and GPUs and some of these other very fast chips that are optimized for parallel processing, we've been able to harness that architecture and make it do some really dramatic things. And those breakthroughs started to be realized right around the 2012 timeframe. And that's where we built, when I was at Coastal Ventures, a few really successful companies kind of leveraging that. And so CAPE is chasing that. So that's a neural network. And the deep and deep learning comes from the notion of a deep neural network. And that's really in reference to more layers of series connected neural network layers.
If it replicates what humans could do, is it just a time saver? Is this something that people could do if you gave them enough time and enough information and I guess enough people to put it all together?
Yes, but you have to be very careful with that question and that answer, because where we've seen the biggest benefit, it's a time saver, but it's a time saver on so many orders of magnitude,
right,
that it doesn't function like a time saver. It's very rarely is it the case that you take 10 people and you get this computer and it does the same thing those 10 people were doing, just a little bit better. It's more like, hey, I got 10 people, and because I can only afford 10 people, I'm doing this thing this way. But what if I could afford 1 billion people or 1 trillion people?
right.
Like, if I could afford that, I would probably do different things and solve the whole problem in a completely different way, right? And so by analog, from a neural net capacity standpoint, in our little piece of the world, analyzing the image is no longer the bottleneck. Taking the picture is. Analyzing all the images is not the bottleneck. So the thought experiment would be, what if I had infinite humans and everyone took every picture I wanted about everything I wanted to look at every day, and then I analyzed all of those and put all that into a database? I have a very high fidelity continuous version of what does the world look like at every place and how is that changing? And now I can intersect that with things like hurricanes or wildfires,
right.
or insured losses, or the mortgage meltdown. And I can understand, okay, what are the changes I'm observing and how do those actually correlate to all these other bits, right? And so what it does is, broadly speaking, AI has caused the need not for fewer people, but the need for more people doing more high level different things to take advantage of that. And we can basically dramatically expand and relegate the computers to doing those tasks that we can specify and do at massive scale.
Right, because you need somebody to drive the ship that's filled with all these people, if you will, or whatever. I mean,
Right.
you mentioned taking the picture, and I know that aerial imagery is the key part of what you guys are analyzing.
That's right.
That's out of your control. Is that a frustration point for you guys? The imagery. I mean, I know that there are many options for imagery today. Is that something that's not exactly in your control, so that you having to deal with?
It actually, that fact was a core premise of how and why we started Cape. I mentioned before Cape, I was investing, and we looked at basically every satellite and drone company that was raising money. And our conclusion from this was there's just going to be a lot of these things out there. And the problem has now moved from can I get a picture to, can I make sense of all these pictures I've got? In fact, the problem's even more complex than that, because it's no longer just pictures. It's I've got pictures, I've got sound bites, I've got customer calls, boarded customer calls, I've got a bunch of other kind of structural information that may or may not be relevant. Okay, so how do I kind of synthesize that and make sense of it against a very kind of important targeted workflow, whether it be, let's say in the mortgage space, it could be what price should I charge this policy? What is the risk that this asset, that this risk kind of meets my underwriting criteria? How do I make that decision instantaneously? In the real estate space, I've got all these esoteric factors. How do those relate to, let's say, even something, as exotic as mortgage default risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now there become, some interesting higher level questions you can answer in really compelling ways by permuting this information, these inputs, and transforming them in some way, and then focusing them on the question at hand.
We can't have a conversation about your company without bringing up COVID and how it's impacted you guys and affected you. I would think that, and one of the things that we're learning the further we get into the COVID period is that there's companies that it's very beneficial to, and companies that it's catastrophic for. But it would seem that for a company like Cape, that it would be motivating for people to give Cape a try, or to use it even more than they were before. Is that the case?
It's a much more nuanced answer to that. There's the obvious things are, Netflix and Amazon benefited, and Hilton Hotels and United Airlines, lost.
Two ends of the continuum.
Yeah. But then there's all these second order effects where it turns out Amazon's revenue went up, but their supply chain logistics was totally thrown into chaos. And so, they've handled that extraordinarily well. But there's a bunch of these complicated effects. So when I think about Cape, there's really, how are my customers impacted and the market I'm serving? And then how is my team impacted, and my capacity to do business, just to operate our own business? And then another one is very relevant for most companies, which is, how are capital markets impacted? If you're a public company, what's this doing to your stock price? If you're a private company like us, what is this doing to kind of your financial investors and current and future, right? And so on all those axes, let's start with the customer space. So when you talk about insurance, broadly speaking, it's been a disparate set of impacts. So a lot of the most challenging stuff in the insurance space has come on first of all, let's separate. The balance sheet investing side of an insurance business is largely siloed. And so they just have to deal with their capital. And so that's broadly does not impact the day-to-day operation of the insurance business, unless their capital reserves fall below kind of rating thresholds. And so on the margins, there could be some people impacted, but broadly speaking, that's siloed. On the operating side of an insurance carrier, you have a few different things going on. Most of the challenges from COVID have been on the commercial business side, business owner policies, business interruption policies, and that whole discussion. But bigger carriers have multiple lines of business. And so while that might be the tip of the spear, their internal legal offices are impacted because they've just got a lot more work. So, if you're trying to get a contract signed, that can have a delay associated. But on the personal line side, automotive, carriers have been a lot more profitable on the auto side, you've seen them giving premium back. On the homeowner side, things have been broadly steady. I've had some carriers tell me quote volume dipped for 3 weeks, but now it's kind of come back to normal. Some carriers told me quote volume increased, and there's a lot of question about long-term how homes are going to get used and how risk will change. I would say there's a macro trend towards more digitalization, which is really, good for us. And there's a macro trend towards more remote risk analysis, which is really the business that we're in. So, we are, to come full circle, we're in the business of helping carriers figure out how to do remote risk analysis. And, the best place is to start with CAPE. And then there's some downstream places you can go with that. If you want to do a remote full virtual inspection, there's some, downstream things you can do as well.
And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because we work on the claims side and in the claims end. And I mean, I could see some ways that CAPE could be utilized maybe on the claims side. Are you guys looking at that? Is that something that you're being asked to do or looking at?
We've broadly stayed away from claims to date. And there's a handful of reasons for that. I can't promise that'll be, the case forever, but rating and underwriting, first of all, it was the most white space for, nobody was solving the problem that we set out to solve. And it was not solvable until kind of deep learning became what it is. So we've basically created this new space and quickly come to lead it, very, very dramatically, frankly. And so we like that. So, but the question is back to what we discussed earlier. If AI lets me do things at a massive parallel scale, then my biggest strength is where I can do more things at massive parallel scale. And so, at the end of the day, if a carrier is going to take a $25,000 loss, which is a median homeowner's loss, it's worth a couple $1,000s to, go have a look and make sure that they're paying the right amount, right? And
Sure.
And so the relative impact of AI on that approach, is a bit more nuanced. Whereas if a carrier comes to me, I can answer a totally different question that nobody else could answer before. Maybe a carrier will come to me and say, "Hey, I want to write 500,000 new policies next year somewhere in the country. Where should I write them? What are the best? Give me a list of 500,000 of the
Great
best
question,
I should
right?
go attack."
Sure.
Like that we do. Like right now we do that. And that's a very unique thing.
That I'm sure it would interest a lot of people, right? Here's the riskier and here's the less riskier. I mean,
Right.
at the end of the day, if you're an executive, if you're running a big carrier, I want to change directions for a minute, because in the few minutes that we have left, and talk about Stanford. And the reason that I want to bring that up is my colleague here, Lee, has been looking at grad school and thinks about getting his MBA. And you got an MBA at Stanford, and Stanford has a fabulous reputation. And I was just wondering if you could share for a few minutes what it was like to get a Stanford MBA, and what's, looking back now, what was the value of that?
Yeah. I can't promise that you'll reproduce these specific results, and that'll make sense in a second. But look, I was phenomenal. I'm a huge fan of Stanford broadly and of the business school, more specifically. For me, it was a great opportunity, very formative. The biggest kind of high level comment would be before business school, I was an engineer, and that's a great thing. But I was really an engineer's engineer, meaning I had thought a lot about, how to solve problems and how to frame problems. But I had never even read an annual report of a company, which is shocking in hindsight. So that MBA program it's one of the top ones. It's also at one of the top cross-functional universities. And so I got very broad exposure to how to think end to end, not only about technical problems, but how to put that in the context of a business and HR problems and marketing problems and how do you sell a product. And so I think the cross-functional academic experience was very valuable for me. I think the group of peers and friends that I made was very valuable for me, and some of them still some of my very best friends. And I actually also met my wife at Stanford Business School. So
Bonus.
that one I can't guarantee you can just replicate.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to find that.
No, I've got that part taken care of. Yeah, that's something I've always been interested in, though, is attaining the knowledge and the networks. Rob has talked about his experience before, and just the networking with the intelligent, like-minded people. That seems very interesting to me.
Yeah, it's a very, very broadly, very good group of people.
So I want to finish out by asking you kind of a general question. You're probably familiar, you probably know who Caribou Honig is. He's a friend of ours who runs the InsureTech Connect convention, or is the chairman of it, of which I'm sure you attend, or your company does. He recently was asked a question about disruption in insurance. And his comment was he thinks that it's more evolution than disruption. I thought that was an interesting take. And from where we sit, we kind of see it that way. How do you feel as somebody who, with a product that could be considered disruptive of sorts, how do you think about that?
I think it depends on kind of at what tier you're thinking and speaking. You know, I didn't set out to start an InsureTech company and said, well, what's a good InsureTech company to start? I set out to solve a big problem that had fundamental value and, a clear ROI. And that's what we're doing. And we're doing a great job of it. So,
Mhm.
I would say that while the thing we do is revolutionary, we're in the picks and shovels business, and the carrier gets a big benefit out of this, but that's really evolutionary for them, right? And so when I think about InsureTech and disruption and Caribou's comments, you know, I would imagine he's thinking first, or the typical audience for that comment would be thinking about all these new MGAs who are going head to head, acquiring consumers face to face with legacy carriers,
Right.
and I think that's there's some great work going on. I'm friends with some of the folks that are building those businesses, and they're very impressive people, no question. But I come back to I'm happy that doesn't fit my style personally, and I'm happy I'm not in that business
Mhm.
for a couple of reasons. One of which being, just personal style, but the other is, you know, with Cape, we're building, you know, a valuable, sticky, reliable SaaS business, which has all of the things that are associated with it. And we get to build these long term kind of relationships with our partners, and that's a real joy. Um, the MGAs kind of are what they've told their investors is they're going to just grow like a weed in this industry and steal market share. And the risk associated with that is when you grow from scratch very, very quickly, you can put a lot of bad risk on your books. And if you end up doing that, it can be a challenge to manage down the pike. And so you just got to be careful when you build that business. And so I think a lot of bigger carriers that I've talked to, executives at big carriers, kind of look at the new MGAs and they say, yeah, this is great. They're doing some interesting things, certainly
Mhm.
around UI, customer acquisition, but a cautious approach there makes sense if you want to be in business for 10, 20, 50 years. Um, you got to think about that. And so that's how I think about that comment. And I'm I think we have a revolutionary product that is powering a very necessary evolution to help carriers get better. And I think we're having a really big impact doing it. And I'm proud of that.
Sure, and it's agnostic to who's using it. You
Yeah.
could have, I mean, they could be a 140-year-old insurer, and I'm sure you have some of those, or they
Yeah.
could be 8 months old.
Both of those are customers of ours, and they're both very valuable, and we like them both. And so I would say this new trend of MGAs, there's some very impressive people behind these things. They
Yes.
definitely have a role to play. If I'm a top 10 US insurance carrier, am I worried that all of a sudden my market share is going to go to zero because insurtechs are going to take over? Not really. I
Right.
think they will have a skew, but these big carriers, this is an industry where they've picked up this sort of slow and due caution approach for a reason, right?
Correct. It's not by accident, and not just history.
That's right.
With every decade that passes, it continues to be a relevant and useful model.
That's right.
Well, listen, we have really enjoyed having you and really appreciate you making time for us. I'll ask you one last thing. We were talking about Bill Gates before we started today. We were talking about his summer reading recommendations, and you brought up that you had the opportunity to meet him. I'm very interested when we talk to CEOs about role models. I think that some people are naturally more inclined to be a CEO based on their personality or their, you know, different picadillos. But can you talk just before we go about role models and what it was like to have the opportunity to meet Bill Gates?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy to. I actually had the chance to spend time with him on a couple of different occasions. And, for me, what was striking is he's somebody I have a ton of respect for, because I think he's very authentic, and he's unquestionably having a massive positive impact on the world. So, he was, this was a decade ago or more, that we got to spend some time together, and he's very passionate about the Gates Foundation. I think they're doing a lot of really good work, just objectively. You could see that. And we also talked a little bit about some of the earlier Microsoft stuff, and you could see that fierce competitive nature come out, but he's very authentically and deliberately and with big impact kind of turned that into, his current pursuits with the Gates Foundation. I think he's fully earned and fully deserves, I think, the level of kind of deference and respect that he receives. And I wouldn't say that about all of the bigger business personalities that I've had the chance to spend some time with, but he's very impressive.
Yeah, he always seems like a very, very impressive person. I've read a lot about him and always enjoy reading about him. Person I would like to meet one day. Well, Ryan, we want to thank you so much for being on today. Just a real pleasure visiting with you and learning about Cape Analytics. And yeah, we thank you so much for being a part.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, guys. It was a lot of fun.
I first met Ryan Kottenstette a year or two ago. He's been making waves, and Cape Analytics have been making waves in the insurance market for some time, and it was great to have him on. Tip of the hat to Martha Notaris.
Why is that?
For helping to, well, Martha helped to facilitate it.
Well, that's
Martha
great.
was a early and often investor when she was at Excel Innovate in Cape Analytics, so I think that she knows it well. And how about their roster of employees?
Oh, yeah. I mean, very, very interesting conversation. I mean, he surrounded himself with all sorts of intelligent people. But as you said, they're making waves in the insurance space. He has a lot of clients, as he said, and really is streamlining the operation and giving great data to these insurance companies to make great decisions. I mean, he said, it's a powerful tool. There's a lot of weight on it that he has to give accurate, good data, and it sounds like he's doing that.
Yeah, and that he saw this white space or empty space where there was a problem that needed solving, and also that he built a company that is healthy, has good margins, and provides us a really, really, really critical foundational need to the industry. So that's a great formula. I love the business sense in it.
Yeah, I do too. Speaking of formula, I still have a hard time understanding exactly what it is that they all do with this deep machine learning and deep analytics, but it's just fascinating to me.
Right. And I think that as in our work on the claims side, we're seeing more and more of how these kinds of things can make their way in and make an impact. And and like I said to him, I kind of see it as that, taking a bunch of people, and it's the same thing that you could do with a bunch of people, but it blew my mind when he said, well, imagine if you had 1 billion people involved, right?
Exactly.
If you had the brain power of 1 billion people, then it really starts to become remarkable.
Yeah, the real deal.
Well, we're really glad to Ryan for making the time to be with us. And as always, we thank all you for listening and being a part of the fun that we have, because I will speak for Lee when I say
we do have fun.
We have more fun than we probably deserve doing this podcast. And you're a big part of that. And we thank you for being with us and for being here. And until next time, we'll say to you,
goodbye, everybody.